Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I ask, before we start, if you'll please turn your cell phones and beepers off. That's good. My name is Skip Rutherford, the Dean of the University of Arkansas Clint School of Public Service, and we welcome you this evening to another in our series of public programs, distinguished lectures, and community conversations. We're honored to have you here. We're proud to be able to bring these programs not only to our students, but to our community and our state. To introduce our speaker this evening is a Clinton School student who started her own nonprofit, a scholarship program helping Hispanic students enter college. She is a graduate of the University of Maryland, and for her International Public Service Project, she will be headed to Nicaragua this summer. Would you welcome Marcela Garcia?
When it comes to the cause of justice, I take no prisoners, and I don't believe in compromise. These are the words of our guest speaker today, a lawyer, an administrator, an activist, and an author. Dr. Mary Berry exemplifies the qualities of leadership, integrity, and justice, and has consistently fought to ensure equal rights for minorities and women. Born in Nashville, Dr. Berry attended Howard University, then gained her PhD from the University of Michigan, and attended the University of Michigan Law School. But more importantly, she takes no prisoners and makes no compromise. Dr. Berry was one of the founders of the Free South Africa movement in the 1980s, which instigated protests at the South African Embassy and a successful struggle for democracy in South Africa. From 1980 to 2004, she was a member and chair of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, and during Dr. Berry's tenure as chairperson, the Commission issued a significant number of reports, including the 2000 Florida presidential elections, police practices in New York City, and environmental justice. In recognition of her scholarship and public service, Professor Berry has received over 30 honorary doctoral degrees and numerous awards. She is one of 75 women featured in I Dream a World, Portraits of Black Women Who Have Changed America. Siena College Research Institute and the Women's Hall of Fame designated her one of America's Women of the Century. She is also a distinguished author and has written several books, including her latest, My Face is Black is True, Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations. Mary Frances Berry has been the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought since 1987 at the University of Pennsylvania, where she teaches history of American law and advises graduate students in legal history and African American history. She has also said, we have to do what must be done to make sure our country maintains its place in the world as a beacon of freedom and justice, and remember that there's nothing about history that says that any nation that comes to power in the world is going to stay there forever. But if we do what is necessary to be done, we can make sure that our people, our country, maintain our place in the world as perhaps the last best hope of freedom and justice. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming someone who always does what is necessary to be done, Dr. Mary Frances Berry.
I was saying to the judge, I had a son in my class when I came in, Judge Griffin. When I came in, I looked at him. First I thought it was his son. Then I thought, well, he's gotten a little older. But they do look alike. And I'm seeing you, Medellin, and everybody here. It's just so wonderful to be here at the Clinton School and to talk about civil rights and whatever happened to the civil rights movement. Bill Clinton used to always tell people, and I guess he still does, whenever he did something that he thought was good on civil rights when he was president, he would tell me about it, and he'd say, well, what do you think? And I'd say, well, I'll give you about a C on that, whatever it was. And then he would say, well, that was okay, that was her job, and, you know, she's supposed to criticize me and do whatever. Anyway, this is the 50th anniversary of Central High School Little Rock crisis. It's also the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Commission, on which I served in the Clinton administration. Before that, was chair of the Clinton administration. And the Civil Rights Commission was set up a few days before the Little Rock crisis. It finally got passed over the filibuster of Strom Thurmond and some other bad people. And then right on the heels of that came the Central High School crisis, while Eisenhower was trying to figure out who to name to the Civil Rights Commission in 1957. And Eisenhower said at the time that he was trying to find some moderate men, because they didn't think of women then, of course, some moderate men who would help him to cool the tensions in the Little Rock thing. He was hoping that, he said that, you know, privately, that he could find somebody who would help him. And then Eisenhower, of course, went on to call out troops, which was unprecedented, and people went through a lot of travail. As we come into this 50th anniversary, the country seems to be beset with tragedies, the shootings at Virginia Tech, and there are all kinds of things that have happened. We're the most, we have more guns, I guess, than anybody in the world in this country. I heard somebody talking about gun control last night, and they said it wouldn't do any good because there's so many guns, you wouldn't be able to find all of them anyway if you did have something. Anyway, this is a time, I think, to reflect on. When I say whatever happened to the Civil Rights Movement, which I picked as a topic, I thought I would consider what happened and how did we get to where we are now and what are we supposed to do next, and what happened to the people who were involved in the Civil Rights Movement, and is there a Civil Rights Movement, or should there be one, and if so, what should it be doing? The students that I have in my class tell me that they're the post-civil rights generation, they tell me. We're the post-civil rights generation. I said, well, what does that mean? The women always say they're the post-feminist generation. Other students, they'll say post-civil rights. Well, that was civil rights, you guys did that, you know, and that's already done. And now we're the post-civil rights generation. So the question is what needs to be done. By anybody's measure, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s was a success. I mean, no matter how you characterize it, no matter how many problems you think still exist now, and I know that Little Rock, the Central High School, has issues and problems, and that the school system does, and they do all over this country. And I know that most black students still go to mostly black schools. Most Latino students still go to mostly Latino schools, and most white students still go to mostly white schools. I know all that. And that we don't call it segregation anymore. We call it racial isolation. That's a euphemism. That sounds better, doesn't it? I'm not segregated, I'm just racially isolated. But it's still a problem. And the problem is still what Brown talked about, the Brown case. Trying to make sure that people have a quality education. So desegregation is not just desegregate because, you know, black children need to sit next to white children to learn or whatever. It was about the quality of education that was offered to people, an opportunity, and not being stigmatized and ascribed that what was inferior was okay for you. And we still haven't solved that problem today. But it was a success. I mean, the civil rights movement was. And what I mean by the standard is that what we were trying to do with the civil rights movement was to implement the great documents of our national life. And I mean by that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I know that the Declaration of Independence didn't include blacks in the beginning, or women for that matter. But it was a principle that Jefferson wrote. I mean, Jefferson could have said all white men are created equal, but he didn't. I gave a talk down at the Woodrow Wilson Library. They invited me to talk to some big donors who were down there at a big conference, and I was to give the after-dinner speech. And they all drank a whole lot of wine, and eat a whole lot of food, and then they were sitting there, and I was supposed to make them feel good so they could give some more money to the library and talk about Woodrow Wilson. And I got up and said, I thought about Woodrow Wilson a whole lot, but there's not much good I can say. I said he was good on the foreign policy, bringing democracy around the world he talked about, but he never did notice that we didn't have it here. And that he was in fact making it worse. And I told them, I said, compared to Jefferson, I mean, even though we do know that Jefferson had sex with that woman, and he was not anywhere near as good as Jefferson. And that's when I told him, Jefferson didn't say all white men are created. If he just said that, all white men are created, we wouldn't have a standard or a principle to try to live up to. But even though we weren't included, the language is capable of including us. And when you look around today to see how much progress has been, look at this, it's a political year. Barack Obama is the new star. And after all, he's African American. And then there's that cute Harold Ford who came so close in Tennessee. I forgot to say Barack Obama was cute. He's cute too. There's Connie Rice, who now no longer have to compete with Rumsfeld to be the head of Bush's inept crew. And it's also true that Oprah Winfrey is the most important person in the publishing industry in the whole world. The publishing industry quakes when she speaks. She can make or break them. And she's the most important person in a whole lot of areas, and she's definitely African American. And there's a Latino mayor of Los Angeles, and there are young African American mayors in DC and Newark, and there are all these people who have now, we can see them everywhere. We can see them. So there's success. And the civil rights movement did establish a standard which made it possible to say we wanted fairness and justice, not just for African Americans, but for Asian Americans and Latinos and gays and lesbians and the disabled, the poor people of whatever race or color, older Americans, Native American Indians. But I have to tell you that now that Coretta has gone on to join Martin and Rosa Parks has gone on and C. Dolores Tucker and all the rest of them, that as Jeremiah said, we're not saved, despite that. All that's happened, but we're still not saved. And so the question is why? We can see it in the slurs and language used by public figures. Amos is gone somewhere. But wrath and self-degradation remain. I just saw on the internet that Russell Simmons is saying that he is now in favor of not using that kind of language anymore. But we just had an incident in New York City the other day where a police sergeant told the women police officers, called them nappy-headed hoes, and told them they should stand up and do what he told them to do, because he thought that was acceptable. And Trent Lott is back in the Senate and is even the whip, after wishing we would go back to the days of Strom Thurmond, the Dixiecrat days. And we had anti-affirmative action referenda passed in Michigan. And Ward Conway just announced today that he's going to Colorado, Arizona, Missouri, and Oklahoma to put them on the ballot just in time for the 2008 election, so that he can create trouble for the candidates who will be running, who will have to stand up one way or the other and to get out the vote in opposition, he hopes, to Democrats in the election. So all this is happening. And so what do we do? And I could give you a whole list of all the things that are wrong. And I'll tell you some of them, but I could stand up here like for 3 hours and tell you all the things, but we don't have 3 hours to do that. I could tell you that we have the disparities in punishment for drug offenses, and we have people in jail, the highest incarceration rate in the world, in a civilized world we call ourselves, with people, most of whom are in there on drug offenses. a lot of them young African Americans, and now Latinos, and now African American women. When we say that there are more African American men in jail, in prison than in college, that's not really true, because the 18 to 24-year-old group, there are more African American men in college. But if you add all the African American men together, there are more in prison. But the old people who are still in prison, you know, they're not college age. And so, but you got all these people, and the money that it's cost, the resources, the impact on the communities that they came from, not just on them. You got all these grandmothers taking care of children because the parents are in jail, in prison, on drug offenses. We don't have drug treatment. I go sometimes and sit down in the court and watch them meet out sentences. And several times I have heard the judge say in the local court, if we had some drug treatment, I would send you to drug treatment. We don't have any. So now I'm just sending you to jail, which isn't going to do any good. We have problems with civil liberties and racial profiling, which was just about gone before 9/11. And now we just profile all the time, and we just think it's just fine. We profile not just African Americans, we profile Arab Americans and Muslims and people we think are Arab Americans and Muslims. We're not really sure what they are. We think they look like they might be Muslims or something. And we do this. Election problems, not just in 2000 and 2004, but we just had the Election Assistance Commission, which was set up after we did our report on the 2000 election. They passed a law in Congress called the Help America Vote Act, which was to outlaw the kind of disenfranchisement that took place. Some of it happened again in Ohio, but the Election Assistance Commission is in the business of writing reports and then pretending like they didn't write them. They wrote a report, hired somebody, a consultant to write a report for them, and he said that there wasn't any voting fraud that the Republicans keep screaming and yelling about. Voter fraud, every time you say something about disenfranchisement. And so then they were told that that was unacceptable. So then they tried to suppress the report and had another one written saying that there was lots of voter fraud. The problem was that the reporter had a copy of the first one, so it all got in the newspaper, so they had to deal with that. We have the Supreme Court considering 2 cases now on school desegregation. And given the people who are on the court, many lawyers believe they might overturn Brown. Now that may sound stark to you. And you might say, we can't imagine that. I mean, no matter how much backsliding we do, we can't imagine that they would just have the nerve to get up and say that. Well, they got this case from Louisville and one from Seattle, and with Justice Roberts and Alito added to the Scalia and Thomas. Thomas already has said he thought Brown was useless and should be overturned. So they will either overturn it or they will limit it severely. And these are people who are voluntarily trying to desegregate their schools, and they're not being committed to do so if this is upheld. There's still garden variety discrimination. I mean, there are testers who go out all the time. You can read about these studies where testers go out to see whether if you're black, do you pay more interest rates when you get a loan? The answer is yes. You have a harder time getting a mortgage. And Latino's always in between, like it's white, black, Latino in between. On who has to pay what and do what. All the data on health. We have AIDS and we have the down low problem, which is, in case you don't know what that is down low. It's people who pretend like they're something they're not, you know. And we have our judgmentalness, I call it, judging other people and their behavior and telling them that they're sinners or something, and which drives people away and which does not help us in treating people and stopping the spread of AIDS. We have healthcare disparities. We have housing problems. You can just name low wages. We have the crummy jobs, crummy education problems. Crummy means bad, inferior. And false promises to people. All of these are what I call headwinds that keep us from developing human capital and opportunity. We have the No Child Left Behind Act. I guess you have it in this state too. Which one of the teachers I know calls Kiss My Behind. And she calls it that because while it sounds good, if you read it, I had my seminar read it. Martin and the rest, I didn't have to read it this time, we discussed it. And in the beginning, it sounds good. It says, we believe every child can learn. And everybody goes, yay, every child can learn, woo. And no matter what the race or whatever, and you're going to keep track of it, and what they make, and test them, and make sure, whatever. And then there's a problem. Because testing is fine, but you don't need to test people to find out that they don't know what you didn't teach them. And if you don't have the money and you don't have the experienced teachers, they got all this language in there. We're going to have experienced, qualified teachers for every child in every school. And they don't. And they don't want to pay anybody, that's the first thing. And they say that teachers should teach just because they like it. I asked a corporate leader who told me that. I said, do you work at that corporation where you work and make the big service because you like it? Do they pay you? Yeah, I would work there if they didn't pay me. Well, so you have that. And then you have the parents and the problem with the situation that the parents are in. So we haven't figured out how to get No Child Left Behind is being reauthorized now, except for reauthorization. So they're struggling with what to do about the teacher problem, what to do about the parents. But on all these issues, backsliding is much too easy. Now, what is the relevance of all that to the topic of whatever happened to the civil rights movement? I believe that when the laws, the civil rights laws were passed, lots of people decided to take advantage of the opportunity that was available. And these are movement people who did something else. Some people got good jobs and good wages. Some people became lawyers, they became judges, they became politicians. You all know that. You can see a whole generation, what happened to people. And that's where they went. And some people were burned out and tired. The problem was that the job wasn't finished. And some people decided to put their whole faith in politics. Now we can elect people. Once we elect them, everything will be fine. And they forgot that if you elect people, you have to hold them accountable. And some people couldn't even remember who it was they had elected. Used to go all around the country asking people who their congressman was. And no matter where I went, they'd say Ted Kennedy. You can't hold anybody accountable if you don't know who it is. You don't know. And so there we are, with people taking advantage of opportunity. And now we have a whole cadre of folks who are doing very well, economically and otherwise, who they did what I call, they got through the window of opportunity when it opened up. And part of the civil rights movement was creating the opening so they could take advantage of the opportunity. But the problem is, what about the people who were behind when the door closed? The windows were shut and they were behind, or they weren't born yet. What about them? And then you have people in the generation that made it, and I struggle with this all the time with people, who say, well, they forgot how to do it. Well, if they do that, they should make it on their own, like I did. When you all know that nobody ever makes it on their own, that's number one. And number two, if there had been a whole lot of people who went to jail and died and did a whole lot of other things that were very unpleasant, I can tell you, they wouldn't have been able to make it. And so now they sit high and look low and say, you know, these people, you know, they're just worthless, and parents are worthless and whatever. And they forgot too about enforcement. And so we don't have a civil rights movement, whatever you want to call it. You can call it banana movement, I don't care what the name of it is. We don't have any real movement to do anything about anything. We get all excited every 4 years about elections, presidential elections. Then we elect people, so we forget that you got to have leverage on the people you elect. And the presidents can't solve every problem. Neither can members of Congress unless the forces come together that commit them to and that lean on them to do it. So all of that we forget. We forgot about enforcing the law, not just passing the law. And so now when I go around, I went out to meet with all the human rights directors of all the states, and then I went to this transportation directors, the people who are in charge of public works in every state, all the roads and bridges and so on, contracts. And they told me that blacks get fewer contracts now from public works in every state than they got in 1970. And nobody was getting very many then. We also don't pay attention enough to courts. Some people, when the battle takes place every time when there's a Supreme Court appointment, some people just say, well, it doesn't make any difference, it's just the law, you know, they'll just tell us what the law said. As if they haven't watched on TV how they talk about judges and how law is done and what lawyers do when they pick juries and all kinds of stuff that happen. They act like they think there's some black letters written down somewhere, and whoever it is going to read those black letters, and then they're going to decide the same thing, and it doesn't matter who it is, which is just stupid, if I may be permitted to say so. So you have a time trying to get people riled up enough to lean on folks to get the right people in the judiciary. And this is particularly true of the Supreme Court fight. So we've had some bad decisions on contracts, on everything, that make it impossible to do. And the best way I can describe the legal problem is this, I guess. For a long time, and during the Civil Rights Movement and after, the idea was we wanted the law to remedy the effects of the discrimination that had taken place for so long. That's what everybody said. And the courts even said, our major objective is remedying discrimination against minorities, African Americans, who have been harmed by a long history of discrimination. What happened in 1978 was the Supreme Court said, that's not true. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to look to see if anybody is harmed. Even if you want to remedy something that happened to black people, you can only do it if it doesn't harm any white people. If you're going to harm any white person, you can't do it. So if you want to give contracts to blacks, you can't give them unless, you know, if you're going to harm a white person who comes and says that they're not getting a contract, then I'm sorry, you can't get one. So what they did was turn the jurisprudence on its head and said, we're concerned about reverse discrimination against whites. We're not concerned about discrimination against blacks. Now those who got a contract before that, or who got a job before that, or who were wherever they were and already had it, weren't affected by that. But other people were. So the law now stands for proposition that you cannot remedy any kind of discrimination against African Americans unless it doesn't harm whites. And that's what Bill Clinton had a problem for when he did Bend It, Don't End It on affirmative action. When the court handed down that decision and said we couldn't use affirmative action in contracts anymore, federal contracts, that all taxpayers pay for it, give people contracts. And he didn't want to do that. So we all sat around trying to figure out how to do something so that we didn't have to stop giving some contracts to black contractors who had never gotten them before, but who are willing and able and capable of getting them, and who are not permitted to get any of those resources. And that's when we came up with this. We had to expand it and say we're interested in disadvantaged people generally, so that we'd be able to live. So the law is there on the books, the laws that were passed as a result of the Civil Rights Movement. The way they've been interpreted, they are practically useless. And when you try to do something, in the courts, people say, as Ward Connolly says in his referendums against affirmative action, that if you have affirmative action for blacks, you're harming whites, and therefore you can't do it. And that's a major issue. Now, aside from the legal part of it, we have a lot of problems. And sometimes the problem is we can't hold more than one idea in our heads at the same time. And we should be able to do that, even if they're irreconcilable. Just hold two of them in your head at the same time. I've been known to have three ideas in my head that didn't logically seem to somehow put together. My friend Bill Cosby has gone around the country, and he and Camille are my good friends and have been forever, has he's been going around the country, and he started one day at the NACP Legal Defense Fund at a ceremony where he was invited, and he told me he was sitting there looking at all of these people in these tuxedos, and all puffed up and everything, including him. He had on one. And Camille was not with him that night, so nobody was there to stop him. And he said, these people sitting up here, they should be out there doing something for these kids who are on the street. I'm going to get up and tell them. So he got up and told them that, you sitting here all puffed up. We sitting there all puffed up. And what you should do is be out there trying to put a body on these kids who are poor and who are down and out and who are like I was, he said, when I was a kid, where I was living in the projects, and my daddy was drunk all the time, sleeping on the couch. And my mama was working herself to death. And I would not have been saved, said Bill, if a guy who was there working in the projects, a janitor, took us under his wing, me and Stinky and Sloppy, those are his two buddies, and put a body on us, as Bill called it, and stayed after us 24 hours a day, making us make something of ourselves. Otherwise, we would not have been saved. And so when he told me that, then he got Stinky and Sloppy to come, and we all had dinner together. They're grown men now, they're not called Stinky and Sloppy anymore, and they all have good jobs, and they are not have never been in jail. And so he's been going around trying to tell people that our major problem, one of our major problems, is doing something about these kids who are not learning in school, and that it's up to parents and up to people in the community to take them under their wing. And he knows that there are some people who are already doing that. 100 Black Men, some of the fraternities and sororities, there are people who are, but they're not enough people. But what has happened is, Bill, in his eagerness to do this, has been taken up by the anti-civil rights people. So that every time you say we need to do something about discrimination, about the mortgages, or about the interest rate on the whatever, or the healthcare disparities or whatever, they say, well, Bill Cosby says you should be working on your own community. And that's what I mean by having more than one idea in your head at the same time. Which is what Camille told Bill when he got home that night. You should have told those people they needed to have more than one idea in their head, because they're going to take that and run. So we need a movement to work on the discrimination issues, but we also need a movement to work on these issues of dealing with the chaos and disorder in kids' lives, and to put a body on them. I mean, I'm absolutely certain of that, no matter what anybody says about it. My sister-in-law worked for her whole career as a first-grade teacher in the poorest neighborhood in her community, where kids, families disoriented, on drugs and everything else. And she used to bring kids home with her and wash their clothes and do all kinds of things, make them study with her at night after she'd been taught all day long, because there was nobody to do it. It's not because the teacher shouldn't have to do that by themselves. And No Child Left Behind isn't going to change anything by itself. So when you ask me if there was a civil rights movement, what it would be doing, it would be talking about people who didn't get through the window of opportunity. It certainly would be talking about trying to reduce and eliminate discrimination against those who did and who find it in their lives, and we do. But it would also be talking about, we got to get the rest of the folks through the window of opportunity. And that's hard. That's very hard work. And it's worth doing as much as the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s was doing. And rhetoric is not going to solve the problem. And it's in the national interest. Martin used to say all the time that when you tell people that they need to do something, you had to make them understand that it was not only moral and just, but it was in their own interest. Demographically, this country is changing. The population of this country, whether or not anybody likes it, is changing. We're going to have increasing numbers of adults of color, Black folks, Asian Americans, Latinos, and the like. The Latino dropout rate is an embarrassment. It's worse than the black high school dropout rate. You cannot have a nation where you have productivity and a good life for people if you don't educate the people you have. You can't talk about some people think, well, if I have, educate my own kids, and if all the people I know are going to good schools, what do I care about all these other people? You care because it's part of the whole fabric that makes up the nation and the economy of the nation and the future. That's why you care. And so as much as we had a movement, a civil rights movement, across racial lines, with people joining together to try to do this is work worth doing, folks. This is work worth doing. And you can put a body on kids, and it's not a matter of race. I know some white folks, some white guys who go out to the schools and put a body on people, black kids. Although I was talking to one group and tried to get people to do that, and people came up after and said they were scared. I said, I'm talking about 6-year-old kids. You're scared of 6-year-old kids. What are they going to do to you? They're not going to do anything to you yet. They'll do something if you don't do something about them. So I ask that what we do is try to reconnect and revitalize our sense of common concern. Martin used to say also that the problem with socialism was that it had a sense of community, but it did not have enough respect for the individual. And the problem with capitalism and our free enterprise system and the way we talk about democracy, we talk about individualism, but we don't have enough sense of community. And that you have to have both in order to make progress. So I ask that we try to go the last mile, if we can, think about it, and that all of you try to figure out some way in which you can help on this. And I don't really care if it's something small. I used to want people to do big things, like go to jail or something, or be a martyr or something, But now I've learned to be satisfied with incremental change. So if there's any little thing anybody can do, then just do that. And also try to think of something while you're joining together with others to do it, that you can do every day of your life to try to make things better. Just some little thing you can do. I mean, if you like pray, believe in that, just pray about it every day. But if there's something else you can do, and just think about some little thing you can do, aside from what you do communally every day, and then just do it every day. But for that thing, don't tell anybody what it is, because you're not doing it so you can tell people. You're doing it for the sake of your own self and conscience and your soul, and you're doing it for the country. And if we do that, I think that someday in this country we will revitalize a civil rights movement, and we will have liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions from the audience.
Or if you have a statement you'd like to make, you just want to testify.
Well, I have a testimony and a question. I've known many of the people that we used to say were pioneers and workers in the civil rights movement, like you, and what as great as it is now. I have had the question posed by old folks like you and me and Darden High. We ought to get out of the way because we'll create more problems and we're not solving them. And Jesse Jackson. But one of the things that I have responded to, Jesse Jackson produced a congressman. I'm trying to see what those of us who are the old civil rights workers, what each one of us can assess and see what we have done to continue the civil rights. What is your position that we should be? We have been the role models of the civil rights movement. what should be our legacy that we can measure, that we make a difference?
Well, I'm quite happy to get out of the way, even though Dr. Darth is 96 and I'm not quite there yet, Dr. Hayes. But I'm quite happy to get out of the way if folks will just, you know, I went to some Urban League torch bearers and something, then they have where you were passing the torch, you know. So I brought this young lawyer who I passed the torch to, and I was expecting her to just go and do everything and then I could go home. And then I found out that she kept calling me up, telling me what I had to do. But in any case, I think that the legacy is all the people who did make it and who are around. But the disappointment is that not enough of them do what they ought to do. They don't, they have a responsibility. And some of the most visible ones do not do what they're supposed to do. They are teaching the youth to go in the wrong direction by example. And that's what I don't like about Clarence Thomas and Connie Rice and people like that. It's not that for Clarence Thomas, it's because he, you know, he denigrates Brown and talks about how we don't need to have this and that, and yet he wouldn't be on the Supreme Court. And Connie Rice, it's not her and Bush's foreign policy that I care about so much, although I don't agree with foreign policy. She's Secretary of State, that's what she's supposed to do. But it's her criticizing the Civil Rights Movement, which many people do not know that she did. She was asked by the press whether she thought Martin Luther King was a hero, and she said no. And she said she didn't even know why he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. Because he was concerned and said in there about his little kids not being able to go to the fair thing, the circus thing, whatever. And she said, well, I didn't want to go there anyway, so I don't know why he was so concerned about that. And then she said that all this change would have happened anyway if there had been no civil rights movement. Now I'm not making that up. You can go to the Washington Post magazine online, and there was an interview with her when she was National Security Advisor when she said that. And these were all gratuitous remarks which didn't have to be made. And so I think that as an example for youth, we don't want youth to think that that's the way you make it in the world, because then they will never do anything to do what, although there are a lot of them. One of the interesting things is that I've seen, you know what a lot of youth are interested in? They are interested in reparations movement. And they are interested in it because, and this book that I wrote is about a black woman who in 1897 started. She had been a slave, and she was getting old like all the old slaves. And she started a movement which had 300,000 ex-slaves in it, old people, who were asking for pensions for their work that they had done as slaves. 300,000, the largest movement of African Americans that ever existed. And she was a washerwoman with a grade level education with 5 children, a widow. And did all of that, and she was lost to history. But in any case, the young people have become interested in reparations since the legal argument that I explained to you about you can't remedy anything, and the attacks on affirmative action. A lot of them have joined in trying to get reparations, some from private, from banks and different things that insured, and to get apologies from people and to work on that whole movement since they see that this legal aspect, and they're active in that. But I think that we have to lead by example. Anybody else have anything?
We keep talking about the judges who were fired, but there's something else that's happening in the Department of Justice, which is removing the right or ability of the senior executives to hire people and having appointees hired. And that's going on kind of secretly, and I think it's really going to change everything.
In the Justice Department?
Yeah, Department of Justice. So, you know, as a citizen, what can I do? I'm screaming in the wind because we're talking about something else in the news. We're not paying attention to that long-term thing that's really going to hurt the human rights, civil rights. So, what can I do? I know I don't really mean you're going to tell me what to do, but how do we get that dialogue started, and how do we engage other people in action?
Well, I can tell you what to do about that. And I can tell you first, so that everybody is informed, you've heard a lot recently about the U.S. Attorney firing Alberto Gonzalez and all that. And what has happened to the Justice Department during the Bush administration is absolutely outrageous. A lot of the attorneys, career attorneys quit, who had been there in the Civil Rights Division. They wouldn't let them handle voting rights cases anymore, where people were disenfranchised, especially black voters, Latino voters. And they wanted them instead to go out and find, as they've done in some cases, start suing black people and charging them with voter fraud because they're trying to get other black people to vote. And that's to undermine the Democratic vote and to discourage people and keep them from doing it. And these lawyers didn't want to do it, so they quit. Not only that, the entire apparatus of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division that is supposed to be devoted to eliminating discrimination is now misused against the people who they're supposed to be, and the hiring. For years, interns in the Justice Department, young lawyers who came in, were hired by the career civil servants who came in for a year or something to see. They took that away from them and gave it to the political appointees that worked for Gonzalez and Ashcroft when he was there. And then they picked the people, and most of them are people who went to the same college, Regent University, down in wherever it is. And that their job is to come there to implement a mission that they all have jointly together. So the entire Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department has become dysfunctional. It's not just the U.S. attorneys, it's the whole apparatus of government. I was talking to Hillary Clinton the other day, and she was talking about how when the Democrats get back in, you've got to clean out. You got so much work to do to fix all these doggone things, because everywhere you look in the thing, the Civil Rights Commission that I was on, when the Voting Rights Act was up for reauthorization this year, they couldn't decide whether they wanted to support there being a Voting Rights Act. So they finally said that they weren't going to take a position because they weren't sure there ought to be a Voting Rights Act, and that they really didn't see any civil rights problems anyway, so they didn't know what people were talking about. So we got major issues like that, hiring people burrowed into all these jobs who somehow, I think the Democrats are doing all this investigations, oversight of investigations, which are necessary. But my mama said to me the other day, my mama's 91, she said, I watch them all the time, on C-SPAN and all this stuff. She said, but it costs money to do the investigations. So should they be spending the money to do the investigations? I said, well, Mom, if you don't do them, these people just don't continue to do what they're doing and burrow in like rats. And she said, well, but it's costing us money to get them, try to get them to stop. Isn't there some way, why don't we just, she said, I won't tell you what she said, but she said, do something to Bush, and it started with an I and ended with an H in some words, she said. But I didn't say that, my mama said that. She doesn't know any better, but she's 91 years old. Anybody else got a question or a comment? Yes, Joe.
Just said. Microphone, please.
Given what you just said, what do you think is the future of democracy in America over the next quarter century? Given what you've seen, given what we are, what do you think are the prospects for democracy in this country?
Well, that's a big question. And I got to tell you that I think the current crisis, and I consider it a crisis that we're in across the board, started with the 2000 election.
Yes.
And here's what I did. When we did our investigation, we found, by subpoenaing witnesses and everything, it was televised all over the world, it was C-SPAN or whatever we did, we found disenfranchisement across the board, people, thousands. Yet, the Supreme Court gave the election to Bush. And the American people didn't do anything. If we had been in France, we look on TV and we talk about the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the Green Revolution, and what all these other countries where people come out in the streets and demand democracy, and we applaud that. But we don't do anything. When that happened, People didn't go down to the Supreme Court and stand before them when they were trying to make a decision to say, no, we will not put up with this. People didn't say anything. All they did was tell their friends, you know, I'm upset about this. That's really too bad. You know, yeah. Didn't even write a letter to the editor or anything. So we don't do anything. And when you are a politician and you find out that you can get away with winning a whole election like that and nobody does anything, then you understand that you can do almost anything you want to do and nobody do anything. And then after that, you just keep on doing stuff and nobody ever does anything. And nobody does anything and nobody does anything. The press was terrible. You know, all this, it was only been in the last year that the press has started really trying, they were scared to report anything. And they would tell you privately, you'd be sitting somewhere having lunch or dinner, and they'd say, oh, isn't it terrible that so-and-so, so-and-so. I said, well, why didn't you say that on the news? Oh, well, we want to have access, you know. So that if you don't keep your democracy will be kept if you keep it. If you don't keep it, then you won't have it. You cannot let people just get away with things and lies. When people tell lies who are your political leaders, you ought to tell them they're lying. Instead of just sitting there like you don't know any better. I mean, I do this show on National Public Radio once a week, and we comment on the news. And last week we were commenting on Bush's statement about Cambodia. We can't leave Iraq because it'll be like Cambodia when we left. Millions of people got killed by the Khmer Rouge. And not one press person, and I'm not a press person, but I was on the National Public Radio, nobody but me pointed out that we left Vietnam, the last American left in 1973. The Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia in 1975. That's 2 years later, right? And the Civil War in Cambodia started because we bombed Cambodia. And people took sides, some for us, some for the Vietnamese. And when the Khmer Rouge killed all those people, it was the Vietnamese who marched in finally and stopped them. And yet he is conflating something, because there's another argument he makes. But the point is that it was just another, lie like the Vietnamese or whatever. But when you don't call people on things, when you don't say anything, when you just keep on acting like, oh, that's okay, they figure we can do anything and get away with it. And so we will have our democracy if we keep it. And if we don't keep it, we won't have it.
That's it.
We have time for one last question.
He had a question and she had a question.
Want to spend all the time saying so okay. Thank you for coming, and I want to ask another question that you may or may not have the answer to. What do you tell young people? I mean, just on the heels of what you were just talking about, with folks getting away with so much, and when I confront young people, are you registered to vote? Are you involved? Or when they talk about some of the miscarriages of justice locally or abroad, why should I do anything? All they care about, well, I'm just going to get my iPod and do whatever, What do you tell a young person when you're looking at the same thing they're looking at, whether it's the election of 2000, 2004, Justice Department, what do you tell someone? And then so many people my age or older aren't standing up, they aren't saying anything, they aren't really holding anybody accountable.
Okay, and it relates to the question you asked, because I didn't say the last thing is, if you care about this, you should tell the Oversight Committee on the judiciary to investigate all this, to encourage them to investigate these things, encourage them to have oversight, so that they're not just, thinking that we wonder what the people out there think, should we be doing this, whatever. And you have to reinforce them and tell them that you think this is a good thing, and if you have another issue that you want to look into, tell them. They happen to get emails or whatever from them. Now, what I tell young people is, even if we don't do it, or the people who you think shouldn't do it, it's worth doing, so you have to do it. You have to figure out, the opportunity to be in politics or involved in it, and then to use it in the right way is there, but if people aren't doing it, then it's up to you to get together to figure out how to do it. It's not up to you to walk away. because the power that is involved is too great to let somebody else have it by default. And you also have to explain to people how things that happen to them are connected to your student aid package is connected to who's running the show. Okay? Whether you get a contract when you're a young entrepreneur is connected to who's giving the contracts. What happens to you, whether you have to go to war or not, is connected to who's there. The threat to you here is connected to who is there. In other words, all these things are connected to you. It's not like something's happening over here and you're over here and you listen to your iPod and nothing's happening and you're just chilling. Whether you get stopped by the police is connected to who's in charge. Whether you go to jail, whatever, it's connected. That's what you have to do. Now you have a question.
Yeah, when Andrew Young was here, I asked him the question that from my observation, Black Power had become sort of like a sleep, or did it exist anymore since the 60s? He answered that it needed leadership, and somebody like Martin Luther King didn't come along all the time. And what you just talked about, the civil rights movement, is Black Power and civil rights movement the same thing, or is it something different? And I see that we need to wake y'all up for the benefit of the whole country, because you're much more visible in relationship to things that when they go wrong, it stands out more. And we need you. So how do we wake you up?
I don't know, because, it's always this question about, is it leadership and can we wait till there's another leader? And I tell the students, that Martin Luther King wasn't born as a leader. I mean, it didn't say on his belly button when he was born leader. He was, chosen to be a leader. So they can be a leader too. So just, sitting around waiting and saying, oh, we had a leader. Oh, I encourage people to go do things themselves. And some of them do things themselves. And so wherever you are, you have to encourage people to do that too. Is that true, Skip?
Dr. Berry, thank you very much. We're going to ask Dr. Berry if she wouldn't mind going over to the book signing table. You all, please come purchase one of her books and let her sign them. We also have a reception in the break area, so please join us there, and everybody can visit. Thank you all for coming. Be sure to take your April schedule and look for the rest of the week. Benny Jean, always good to see you. And you were nice tonight.